I think the concerns about bone density and loss of lean mass are mostly come from populations of people who are losing weight and not doing resistance training.
I started this kind of personal experiment. I started semaglutide, so that's Ozempic or Wegovy. The thought here was if I do resistance training, have a high protein diet, and just see if these drugs, you can get the benefit to body composition and increase muscle mass at the same time.
And so what happened to lean mass?
It's a pretty impressive during the duration you were on Ozempic.
My name is Matt Caberline, and welcome to the OptiSpan YouTube channel. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the OptiSpan podcast. We are trying something new today. This is our first time with three people on the show at one time. So you all know Nick Rappis, who is back once again for more, and George Sutphin, who is back visiting Seattle, our current leader in terms of views. So we invited George back to do a couple of episodes, but we figured this time we would put him through the ringer. So this morning, George did both a DEXA scan, which I actually administered. So I am a certified X-ray technician in the state of Washington for DEXA, as is Nick, and VO2 max, which Nick administered on George. So we're going to actually look at the data and talk about it and see what happens. So this should be fun. So welcome, guys. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, good to be back.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Yeah. Perfect. All right, let's get started. So, few notes at the beginning, as the percentiles I'll mention when we talk about your DEXA are kind of compared to people your own age, gender, ethnicity.
And you had a DEXA once before today, right?
Yeah, maybe a year and a half ago, somewhere in that range. So.
And that was at a company called Fitnessity?
Yeah, so they do this in like Southern California, Arizona, and
okay.
And they don't own their own equipment. They partner with like a radiology.
And it was
group.
a different machine, right? You said the one that we use today looks different than the one that you had used.
I think it's a different brand.
Okay.
So a little bit, few differences there.
In addition to DEXA, we did the VO2 max this morning, which was pretty fun. I'm excited to hear about your experience on that. And that was the first time you've done one?
This is the first time I've done VO2 max, and I'm less familiar with that one, so I'm hoping to learn something.
Yeah, well, I got your data here, so.
All right, so let's look at the DEXA. So this is done on a GE machine through Body Spec, although I actually did the operation of the machine this morning. So I am a certified DEXA X-ray technician in the state of Washington, as is Nick now. So that was kind of fun. George said he wanted medium rare, and I think I got pretty close to that.
Yeah, so your body fat was 20.1%. And so your first DEXA about a year ago was around 30, I believe, like low 30s.
Yeah, around 30. So we've made a lot of progress.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I mean, 10% body fat drop in a year and a few months is pretty impressive. And that takes you all the way from the 75th percentile to the 20th percentile, meaning 80% of people in your age and gender have a higher percent body fat than you do.
Right. And so do you have like a personal goal for this number? Is it just something that you're happy with the track you're on?
Definitely on track. So, I mean, before DEXA data, of course, we have fewer tools. And if you look at BMI, which we all know is not a perfect readout. But for me to be at like a healthy BMI, I think I should be about 175 pounds. So I was kind of I had in the back of my head going into kind of this weight loss or this kind of portion of the health journey, if you will, getting down to about 175. And based on DEXA results, I think that and the body fat percentage, I think I calculated that would put me at about 10%.
I was going to say
body weight.
Because I'm sitting around 178, 179 right now, and I'm in the 11 point something percentile based on my DEXA today.
Yeah, so
that's
based
pretty
on,
lean.
So I know. So like I know you've talked about getting to 10% or below 10%.
Just as I want to do it once in my life, not suggesting that's the healthiest percent body fat.
I agree. So BMI is not a great metric on its own. Yeah. So that body weight would put me probably below a kind of maybe below a healthy. I don't know what's healthy, right? That's
I mean, I think so. What this tells me is your muscle mass, your lean mass, is relatively high, which is good. So you don't need to so body weight is less, I think, informative than body composition in this case. So again, what's the optimal percent body fat? I'd say we don't really know, but for my age, you're a little bit younger, but I'd say, for sort of our demographic, maybe 12 to 15% if you're trying to get optimal.
That's kind of the range I'm probably wanting to hit and maintain.
Yeah, but it's really the visceral adipose that we want to pay attention
That's
to.
right,
And so
yeah.
here it's interesting, right? Because your visceral adipose hasn't really changed that much. Now, different machines.
Yeah.
And again, Nick and I talked about this on our last episode where we went into DEXA, that the visceral adipose seems to jump around a bit. And I still don't really know. I don't have a lot of confidence as to how quantitative this number is. It's kind of surprising you would see a 10% change in body fat and no real change in visceral adipose between the two. But
I agree. That looks high. So,
yeah. So, maybe the body spec algorithm reads a little bit high for visceral adipose. I'm not sure.
I think, Nick, we were talking earlier, what can affect visceral adipose outside of just strictly weight loss and gain?
One thing I've heard is more correlated with stress, like psychological stress. If you're higher there, potentially it could affect. But
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I guess I think we should really probably do a deep dive on this. I'm not sure that we really have a great understanding of, other than some people are genetically predisposed to have higher visceral adipose or lower visceral adipose. I'm not really sure we have a great understanding of how diet, stress, alcohol consumption, exercise impact visceral adipose as a function of total adiposity. There's got to be good data out there. So I think we just need to dive into the research a little bit and nail that down because it's really important. Of course, because visceral adipose seems to be particularly associated with metabolic risk, right? Risk of diabetes and metabolic disease. So you can be very lean, have high visceral adipose, and be at high risk for metabolic dysfunction. So if this number is correct, that's something you still would want to pay attention to, right?
Absolutely. And that's, on my radar now for sure. Yeah. But this has been a high stress period for what that's worth. And knowing myself, how I respond to stress is I don't sleep as well.
Is it grant season? It's always grant season, I know.
It's tenure packet coming up.
Oh,
so,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I eat a lot worse and I don't sleep as much. And so there's a lot of things that could contribute to that.
Well, your body composition is going the right way.
That's true.
Whatever you're eating, it seems to be going in the right direction.
What's kind of interesting though is your body fat percentile, your 20th, which is great. You're like what Matt was mentioning, but your visceral is in the 60th. So usually those are more correlated. Than they are for you.
Right.
Something to look out for. But hopefully if we get you down to like 15 or so body fat percent, and when you do the DEXA again on the same machine, it'd be nice to see that visceral go down to 1 or lower.
I mean, assuming this is accurate, you'd be one of those people that Peter Attia says has a small bathtub, right? Meaning that the fat, that you don't have a lot of room for the fat to accumulate in the healthy regions, and it spills into the unhealthy regions. Yep.
Okay, so moving on.
All right.
So bone mineral density, your Z-score was 0.8, which is 70th percentile.
So that means 0.8 standard deviations above the average for the population for your age and gender. So
it's good. Still in the center of the bell curve, but toward the top. That's positive.
Do you do a good amount of resistance training?
So the resistance training I do is primarily like rock climbing in the gym, and then I try to do some kind of bench press, power lift and squats, that sort of thing.
Perfect.
A couple times a week. So kind of a combination of those two, depending on how active I've been in the gyms.
Yeah, that's good. What moves the needle the most for bone density usually is like ballistic movements, so jumping, or axial loaded movements, so movements where you have a weight on your back or overhead and you're kind of compressing your spine.
Yeah.
So overhead press.
Plyometrics.
Yeah, plyometrics would count for sure.
Yeah, which I don't do now, but I've done that in the past.
And then body weight was 202. So what's the kind of the highest and lowest you've been in the last year or so? I'm curious.
Yeah, so my peak ever was around 225, and that was so we have this DEXA I took in January 23. That was probably 2 or 3 months after my highest point ever, and one of the kind of motivators for changing something up and trying to get things down. So and then I've been down as low in my adult life, probably as low as 180. That was back when I was in Matt's lab. me and a couple of the other graduate students were tried some
I remember
fasting.
you guys played around with 1 meal a day.
Yeah, and
wow.
fasting things.
Yeah.
So it does work for body weight.
One of these days, I'll
yeah.
tell you. I won't say the name because I haven't asked him if it's okay to publicly talk about it. But one of your colleagues in this endeavor, I vividly remember, was doing 1 meal a day, and we went to a conference. I think you might have been there, and the hotel had the all-you-can-eat breakfast. And,
Oh, yeah.
And he had decided that because there was an all-you-can-eat breakfast, he was going to go off of his 1 meal a day sort of intermittent fasting. And I swear to God, he comes over with a plate of bacon. I mean, it is a mountain of bacon. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Since I went on 1 meal a day, I've had this craving for bacon. Dude, come on. So that's when I knew, like, as if I didn't already know there were psychological consequences to intermittent fasting and caloric restriction. I was like, man, that just does not seem like a great idea.
No.
Yeah.
But you did get your body weight down.
I've never eaten my body weight in bacon based on fasting.
I think
so
he was trying.
Right. Yeah. So I didn't have quite that effect.
I've seen, believe it or not, I've seen all sorts of wacky stuff at scientific conferences from people who are practicing caloric restriction. So that was not maybe one of these days we'll have a special episode on all the stories of things I've seen from people practicing caloric restriction at aging conferences. That is in the top 10, but certainly not the top 2 or 3.
One I remember is you said people had a pocket scale, like they brought their own food
Yeah,
scale.
way out their meals, way out their salad. Yeah.
Yep.
I did 1 meal a day. I wish I had a CGM. Curious to see what that would look like.
Probably be, well, depending on what you're eating for that 1 meal, it'd probably be pretty good. But
Flat, then big spike, then flat.
Maybe. Yeah, it depends on what you're eating.
Yeah, I tend to. I've done a lot of like experimenting with different diets and things like that. And the fasting was fine. I actually feel like it was pretty good for energy and certainly for weight loss. But then there's been these concerns lately about losing lean mass when you're doing that, and
bone density
and bone density. And so I've sort of kind of pulled back and away from either time restricted eating or fasting.
Yeah, I mean, we've sort of gotten off on a tangent, but it is useful to explicitly say, I think the concerns about bone density and loss of lean mass are mostly come from populations of people who are losing weight,
right,
and not doing resistance training. So
that's right.
I think it's an open question, and I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect you can largely counterbalance the risk for lean mass and bone density if you're practicing resistance training and probably increasing your protein composition of your diet somewhat. So, and again, we'll probably just talk briefly about my DEXA from today and my trajectory, but, I've lost, 15 pounds probably over the last year and a half, and seen no loss in lean mass at all.
Yeah.
Or bone density, as far as we can tell by DEXA. So it is possible to lose weight without compromising those other aspects of body composition.
But you're really diligent with your protein intake.
Yeah, I eat
and then
very high protein diet and
resistance
resistance training. Yeah.
So.
Well, in fact, have you been doing anything in terms of protein composition?
Yes. So this might be the right time to talk about like the strategy here. So near the beginning of this period, I actually started taking a GLP-1 agonist.
Oh, really?
So this was part of this was like I've had this experience with fasting. Where
so when you say near the beginning of this period, you mean like starting at 2023?
Probably it was when I was at 225 was like the point where I took right around the peak weight.
Okay.
So I had previously had experience with like ketogenic diet and fasting, and I had this this concern that maybe we'd be losing lean mass, and so I thought I would try something different this time, and I went on one of those. So on this chart here, the first arrow I started semaglutide, so that's Ozempic or Wegovy, and then I switched to tirzepatide at the later arrow. So the thought here was I thought I would try one of these, but also focus on high protein and see if I could, because there's also a concern with these GLP-1 agonists that maybe you lose equal parts fat and muscle. Right. And so the goal here was to, if I do resistance training, have a high protein diet, and I was aiming for somewhere between like 2/3 of a gram and a gram of protein per body weight, which is the range you've been talking about in the past on the podcast. And just see if these drugs, you can get the benefit to body composition with and increase muscle mass at the same time.
And so was that why you got the first DEXA, because you were aware of this and you wanted to track it over time?
I've been wanting to get one for a while, and I'd been thinking about starting this. So I started this kind of personal experiment, and unfortunately, the getting the DEXA scheduled ended up being delayed by 2 to 3 months because we kept canceling the appointment for I don't remember the reason, but so I ended up missing the peak or like a starting point. But so this was a couple months in, and after I'd already lost maybe 10 pounds on the process. So yeah, so that's
Great.
also some.
Well, thanks
some
for sharing.
context.
I think it's important for people to hear about these experiences. So
yeah,
and I didn't know that until you said that, which is also great.
Right.
I'm curious what your user experience is like with it. I actually haven't talked to someone who's been at least admittingly regularly using it. So
that's part of the reason I thought that, if we're going to talk about this, we should go and do it, because like clearly there's lots of people using it.
Yeah.
And
absolutely no reason to at all feel like you shouldn't talk about it.
That's right. But there seems to be this kind of idea that like there's something you shouldn't talk about, but that's not the case. And it's like it's a tool that we have to manage these things. And yeah, I had a specific. It's just like everything else, right? There's a specific goal. We measure what we're doing to begin with. We take the intervention and we measure what happens, and see if we can achieve those goals.
So again, we'll go back to the DEXA in a minute, but I'm sure you've thought about this. Are you intending to stop taking the GLP-1 agonist at some point?
That is the goal. And so especially with this body composition change, so we haven't talked about muscle mass yet, but if I can lose, get down into the range of fat percentage I want, but also have higher muscle, then potentially it will be able to maintain that easier without the drug. And so that's part of the goal here.
Yeah. Okay.
Appetite-wise, has it been hard for you to eat enough protein?
So that is interesting. So the drug, it does have a very noticeable effect on appetite, where you just eat a little bit and you feel full. It's more dramatic than I would have expected.
Yeah. Now that you say that, I did notice at lunch that the other three of us had all scarfed our salads, and you were like halfway through
picking
yours.
at it.
So.
Yes. So trying to hit the protein target is challenging, and occasionally, like, I don't know, there's a question like, should you push and eat more protein to hit that number or not? So I try not to. I think I probably hit the 2/3 of a gram most days, and I try to get up to 1 gram per body weight, and I do that probably, I don't know, half of the days during the week or something like that. So
cool. So let's see how that did then. So this is pretty neat. So this was a dedicated effort to maintain lean mass on a GLP-1 agonist.
Yep.
So successfully lost, from your peak weight, 23 pounds, from your first DEXA, 15-ish pounds.
Yep.
And so what happened to lean mass?
Yeah, so pretty impressive. So your fat-free mass index and your appendicular lean mass index. So two different ways of kind of measuring.
You want to clarify again what those are?
Yeah, so fat-free mass index is kind of like BMI, but for fat-free mass, so for muscle. And then ALMI is very similar, but it takes out the torso, so it's just your arms and legs.
Gotcha.
Because your torso, you have your heart and organs, other things that could affect the numbers. So usually they correlate, and yours do. For the most part, they're a few percent off. But essentially, you're around 75th percentile for both of those, and now you're around 95th percentile. So you gained a lot of muscle during the duration you were on Ozempic, which I think
so you've actually increased. Is that right? Increased muscle mass, like absolute mass, not just as a percentage, while losing 15-ish pounds.
Yeah. Wow. And I think it was I did do the calculation at some point. I think it was on the order of 7 or 8 pounds of muscle mass.
Yeah.
That same
so,
time.
I mean, again, this is proof positive that you don't have to lose half the weight in lean mass when you're on these GLP-1 agonists.
Right.
Now,
so,
again, maybe your unique genetics, who knows, but I would be pretty confident to say the resistance training for sure played a role.
Of course.
Probably the protein composition in the diet also contributed.
Yeah, in both of those things. So I've never focused on protein content before as a primary metric. And the only thing I was really doing in this case was trying to hit protein numbers. I wasn't tracking carbs or fat or anything. But I feel like subjectively, this is the first period, probably in the last 10 to 15 years, when I feel like I was able to increase strength and kind of metrics of resistance training and things as well. So, and protein seems to be at least part of that equation subjectively. So
well, congratulations. This is great.
I remember when Ozempic was first kind of being talked about a lot, I was telling my clients to say, hey, if you decide to do this, let me know, because I will write you a diet plan, a protocol to make sure to mitigate muscle loss.
Right.
And this is exactly what I would have done. So it's kind of cool to see that that theory actually works of just kind of keeping that protein high.
Yeah, and of course I'm an N of 1, but this shows that it can work, and I'd be interested in see some sort of formal study with a cohort of people to see where the averages come for something like this.
And again, I mean, the way I would frame it is, I think we all have our opinions on protein composition in the diet and its relevance in the context of resistance training and maintenance or building new muscle. Independent of the protein composition, though, I think the resistance training, there should be really no question about whether people should be doing that on these drugs. That's
Absolutely.
a no-brainer.
Which, coming back to your weight graph, I kind of think you can see it comes down and then dips up again around March.
Yep.
I think if someone was looking at this and their main goal was to get this graph as low as possible, they might be upset. But when you look at your two DEXAs, I think that increase up around March is muscle mass.
In part. So we talked a little bit about stress, and this last year has been a series of pretty intense deadlines. So if you look at kind of that first initial drop, right at the bottom of that is where that started. And I mentioned that I have the way I respond to stress. I eat a little more and I don't sleep as well. So you can kind of pinpoint the deadlines based on where those graphs are. You go up, you hit a deadline, it drops again. You go up. So I'm actually curious. I'm just about to turn in my tenure packet, and so I've got kind of a period where I'm going to be lower stress, and I'm really interested to see where the next 6 months go from here.
Cool. Well, we'll have you back, and we'll see what happens.
Yep.
But you're definitely going the right direction.
Yep.
And we'll also repeat your VO2 max. So
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of fun. So I wanted to just get your own kind of experience.
So actually, why don't you give an intro to VO2 max?
Yeah.
Because maybe not everybody watching.
Cool. So it's the same way where if you go to the gym, you have an objective measurement for how strong you are, like your grip strength or your bench press. This is sort of an objective measurement for your cardiovascular system. So V volume is actually volume over a period of time. Oxygen, so the maximum amount of oxygen you're able to intake through your lungs and essentially create into energy. So ATP on a cellular level. And so we also have the percentile charts. We'll kind of see how you line up. But
and so VO2 max is going to be primarily a measurement of cardiovascular health. And we're particularly interested because this is one of the biomarkers that is most strongly correlated with your risk of dying, right?
Yeah,
basically all-cause mortality, right?
Exactly. Yeah, going from the bottom quartile to the top quartile has a bigger hazard ratio than quitting smoking or being diabetic. So it's huge, at least in terms of the research we have.
Yeah. And what is the benefit to going from like average into like the higher the top quartile or something is that?
So there's a pretty big 2018 study about VO2 max that gets referenced the most in terms of its relationship with hazard ratio and all-cause mortality.
Yep.
So going more from average to high, I think it was like a 4 or 5% decrease in hazard ratio.
All right.
And then going from high to elite, so the top 2.5% was only 1%. So it's a bit of diminishing returns, which is usually why we say get into the top quartile and you're kind of milking most of that, the benefits.
And again, I mean, as always, it's important to note that this is correlation, right? So is it the case that VO2 max per se is causing the reduction in mortality? I mean, again, it's plausible given what VO2 max is probably representing, but it's a really good biomarker, it seems, for risk of dying and risk for other age-related diseases. So.
And even if it's just a correlation, it's probably reflecting some underlying set of biology that is beneficial to both, Absolutely. Even if it's not in the causal chain itself.
Yeah. To me, it reflects a healthy lifestyle in terms of you're getting a certain amount of cardio in.
Yeah. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think VO2 max is thought to be reflective, particularly of the amount of exercise you get at a particularly high threshold of cardiovascular effort, right?
Yeah, you can increase it more by doing the more like zone 5 high intensity training.
Yep.
It'll go up even if you do more like zone 2 steady state training as well. Just not quite
depending
as
on
much.
where you're at, right? Presumably if you're relatively high, just doing zone 2 isn't going to get you any higher.
True, yeah. Just like with getting to 10% body fat, is the closer you get to the outlier, the harder.
Okay. So what are the metrics we should be interested in here?
Yeah, so let's start with, there's the actual VO2 max itself. So before we get to that, actually want to talk about just how your experience was. Is your first time doing one? Was it what you thought it was when you've seen kind of the pictures of the mask and the treadmill?
Yeah, I didn't really know what the procedure was. Maybe it took a little longer than I was expecting, but yeah, you just kind of ramp up until you hit failure, basically.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it is worth saying this is a maximal effort VO2 max assessment, right? You can estimate VO2 max by submaximal effort. That's what your Apple Watch will often do. So that's probably not as accurate, but...
Yeah, so there are some sub-max ways you could test your VO2 max. Like a Cooper, you do a 12-minute run and kind of put it into equation. You could do a 6-minute average watts and then divide that by your kilogram. There's a few different ways of doing it. So I'll just go online.
This is kind of the gold standard.
This is the gold standard for sure. But for our audience who might not have access to one of these, I would just Google sub-max test.
Okay.
All right. So good experience. Went to failure. Towards the end, your shoe came untied, and that was the first one.
That's true. So, yeah, we had some prop failure, if you will.
Double knot those shoes.
So the number that we got, I don't think is representative of your true failure, and we'll go into that. So you got 43.5.
He says that to everybody. He's just trying to make you feel better.
That's you, Joe. Yours is the opposite. Yours seems too high for some reason. That puts you at the 75th percentile, so top quartile, like we talked about. For your age, 52 and above of VO2 max would be that top 2.5, so that extra sort of 1%.
Boy, that's ambitious.
Yeah. I think, but again, I don't think you're actually 43. If I had to guess, you're probably closer to 46 to 48 range.
Okay.
Because your max heart rate, you got up to 175, and you said you've seen 185 during your
I
workouts?
hit 184 when I did a max heart rate test on a bike. So.
Yeah. So I think more of us terminating the test came from just the shoe being untied and just kind of other things.
Yeah.
So,
well, and you ride a bike a lot, right? So again, I've heard, I don't know how much difference it makes, but I've heard that VO2 max testing on the type of exercise that you are most acclimated to may get you closer to your true VO2 max. But regardless, I mean, I think this is a pretty good number and probably close, right, to what your actual VO2 max is.
Yeah. So some other cool things we saw was your heart rate recovery in 1 minute. So that's the time when once we terminate the test, in a minute, how low did your heart rate go, and what's that sort of difference between the two numbers? So you went from that 175, it went down about 25 beats per minute, which is good. So kind of in that grade, the top is 30 plus beats per minute.
Okay.
But again, if we got your heart rate up to 185, it would be a bigger percent. I think you'd be closer to that 30. So we'll try again next time.
More rapid drop.
Yep. And then so max heart rate, like I said, we got to 175. And then your theoretical max heart rate, 220 minus your age, puts you at 179. So you're pretty close to that. But I think you could get over it.
I've seen higher than that. So.
For sure. Yep. So what does your kind of current cardio routine look like? Or I guess fitness routine in general?
Yeah, so I try to build it into my lifestyle as much as possible because that just makes it easier to maintain. So I live about 9 miles from work, and I commute on my bike probably 3 to 4 days a week on a normal week. And I wear a heart monitor, and I try to keep in zone 2 for most of that time. And then on the way home, I go up a big hill. And so I try to push to like zone 5 and get some zone 5 in during that period. And so I'm doing, 18 miles 3 or 4 times a week. It's probably a total of between an hour and a half and 2 hours. And then for the resistance training, we are at the Rock Gym once or twice a week. And then I try to do it like maybe another resistance training on top of that, or make up for a missed day with resistance training, just doing bench press and the big full body movement sort of exercises. That's my typical week.
Nice. What levels are you currently climbing in the gym? Do you keep track of that?
Yes, though our gym is on a its own scale, so I don't actually know how it tracks with like the V system or things like that. And it's a bouldering gym, so it's all whatever the scale would be, it's bouldering. But I don't know. My son started climbing. I think he climbs better than I do, but
as he should
at 8 years old. Yeah. So.
I'm guessing your climbing's gotten better as you've lost a bit of body weight too, right?
It makes a huge difference. Yeah. That 20 pounds, you feel it on the wall. For sure.
Yeah. I as Nick knows, I like pull-ups a lot better now at the weight I'm at than 12 months ago.
Yeah, I haven't really tested my pull-up ability recently, but doing the climbing, you're doing more whole body push, but it's probably better than it was. So.
I bet you could do a fair number of pull-ups.
I've heard people mention that climbing is a lot more legs than people assume.
If you're climbing correctly, so my natural way of climbing is to just pull myself up with my arms, but that's not how you're supposed to do it. And I'm definitely better form than I used to be, having climbed now for a couple of years.
I think this is also a good example of, do the type of exercise that you enjoy.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Makes a huge difference. And the fact that you can do it with your son, right, is very cool.
Yeah. And that's changed over the years. So I climbed a little bit early college, but in between then it's been more hiking and different, weightlifting routines. So it's changed a lot over the years.
Cool. Well, it seems to be working. So our last graph here, that X is where you are. So you had 43.5. So you're kind of right in between those two, normal and high range. So getting close to that top 25 percentile.
And that's probably closer to the high range if that number was a little bit low, right?
Totally, yeah. Well, thank you for your time. That was fun this morning.
Yeah, well, thanks for the information. I've certainly with the VO2 Max, I've learned a lot, and I look forward to seeing how it changes by the next one.
Great, yeah, and I think this has been a lot of fun just to see where you were at, hear about your journey, where you're at now, and where you want to get to. So yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks for sharing.
Of course.
And thank you all for watching. Hopefully you found this as interesting as I did. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please put them below. And if you're not yet a subscriber, hit that subscribe button, because we want to get to 10,000 when we can do some very cool stuff for you all. And hopefully we will see you next time on the OptiSpan podcast.